Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. I want to give you an example of a bad take of a complex, dark movie. Everyone has the right to their opinions, of course, but they should make it clear. But hey, I don't like dark, complicated movies. They're not for me. They don't say that. They give a universal point of view, meaning that they're right and everyone is wrong. So let's look at what Paul Shurey of Screen Rant has to say. Now, I've had a little exchange from him. I could see he was getting annoyed with me, but I had to say something because when intelligent people see this kind of take, and again, Paul is absolutely free to have this take, but he should say, disclaimer, I don't like long, complicated movies, and I don't understand that a detective story and a Batman story are actually the same thing. So let's take a look at this. Arctic Ninja Paul. The Batman is a perplexing mix of brilliance and confusion. I don't understand what you were confused about. It oversteps its desire to be a detective story in lieu of being a comic book story. That actually makes no sense, right? What is a comic book story? A comic book story, Paul, can be anything. Haven't you read a comic book? It's basically a blank slate and people draw pictures and write a story. There's not one defining comic book story, Paul. What are you actually talking about? Struggling between being a gritty noir thriller while appeasing genre expectations. In other words, Paul is unhappy that a Batman stan has made a film for Batman stans. 2. Dark, moody. So dark and moody are bad now, right, Paul? Is that what we're saying? Everything has to be bright and funny and smiley, which is fine. So obviously, Paul, you don't like dark, complex stuff, right? But I think you're a fan of Snyder, so it's a bit perplexing here. Maybe that is your agenda here. I don't know. Overstuffed, which is something they told us about Batman Returns, one of my favourite Batman movies. Just because you have a few villains and a few extra characters, it doesn't mean they're overstuffed. Unnecessarily convoluted. What do you mean by that? Basically, this is all about a film being 3 hours long. Anyway, beautifully shot and right with anxious atmosphere. It's a distinct take, but maybe not the best one. Right. It doesn't have to be the best one, right? Many people think it's the best. Some people think it's as good as the best, right? I think it's an amazing CBM. I haven't decided where I'm putting it yet. Robert Pattinson does a stellar job as the Batman, while meandering through Bruce Wayne. Kravitz is a provocative Catwoman, but skips in and out with much renaissance. That's interesting because a couple of these men have said this about Zoe's performance. I didn't see it. I didn't see it like that. Farrell's Penguin is a riot. He's entirely unrecognisable. Wright's Gordon is rather flat. Surprisingly, no, he's not flat. Maybe in your opinion he is, Paul, and that's fair enough. He's not flat. That's the personality of the character. Sadly, Circus Alfred barely registers to the point that he may as well have not even been in the film. There is a point to Circus's character here, but what he says here sadly has some truth to it. But I wouldn't go as far as to say he may as well not have been there. But this is a spoiler thing. We should have had a more relevant Alfred within the story, and that is disappointing. But I'll go over that in my spoiler review. While the use of various locations build Gotham has some strong visual punch, it feels very much like a hodgepodge of places, which it is. Well, obviously, maybe Gotham was shot in different places. I don't know those details. You as a journalist do. But it didn't seem like a hodgepodge of different places. It looked like the same place. But it seems like you're not happy that Gotham was shot in different places, which happens. I don't get that again. A shame they didn't focus more on the look and feel of Glasgow, as those locations give the most character and atmosphere, whereas the others feel very dark Knight trilogy, as they are. You want The look of Glasgow to represent Gotham. Really? Your opinion. The action is sparsely peppered in, but still consistent enough to keep you engaged. It's rough, violent and brutal, which you pretty much knew before you saw the movie, but in a more barbaric beatdown style than an aboric, skillful and redefined one. Very similar to Nolan's films. Really? You got that? But not as sleek. Interesting. Affleck's warehouse scene in BVS is still the best Batman fight sequence put to live action. No, listen. So we know where he's coming from. He's very biased towards Snyder, and that's okay. He's right. The Batman warehouse scene is still one of the best, including the Batman fight we've ever seen. But the best thing in Batman media I've ever seen is the directing of Snyder with the Batmobile chase when, Ben Affleck's going after the goons as Batman when they've got the kryptonite. That's one of the best things I've ever seen. So he has a point. As it feels the most in tune with the Batman in comics. So it'd be interesting what kind of comics Paul reads. So very similar to Nolan's films, but not as sleek. Affleck's warehouse scene in BVS is still the best fight sequence to live action, as it feels the most in tune with Batman in comics. But there's so many comics, Paul, so you can't sporadically just say all comics, right? The Batmobile chase scene is a strong highlight and a great example of the film's superior sound design, by far the most explosive and adrenaline-fueled moment. The whole film vibrates and hums, keeping the anxiety-induced feeling of fear and trepidation alive throughout, as it builds to the finale. Paul Dano's Riddler is a pretty creepy villain overall, a bit too creepy. It's like listening to a child who was a bit scared of something he watched. What do you mean a bit too creepy? He's supposed to be creepy. Maybe too creepy for you. In many ways, he's the polar opposite of Jim Carrey's Riddler. Really? Really? Did you expect Jim Carrey's Riddler in this movie? What does that even mean? You saw the TV spots, the trailers. Paul and Matt told you what this Riddler was going to be. Crazy. Coming off as more of a Zodiac killer, which we knew, than a comic book baddie. Well, he is based on a comic book baddie, but they've taken him on a bit. They've made him like this in this film, and that's okay. Weren't you the person who was saying that Zack Snyder deserved his freedom? Which he does. Doesn't this director deserve his freedom? Tomatoes. We needed much more time with Dano, however, as he shines the most at the end. Even his motivations plans are more incel crazy than brilliantly orchestrated. Think about this. When you see the film, you will see some brilliantly intelligent, mystifying riddles. Wouldn't incel construct those riddles? Of course he wouldn't. But of course, incel is a buzzword. To these people, all us men are incels anyway, right? But apart from them, who are also men, but the people calling men incels are not incels, apparently. Anyway, I've knocked that out. Michael Giacchino's score is absolutely a character in this film for me. The score is the best part of it all. I don't agree. It's a great score. It's not the best part of the movie. It literally drives the movie from start to finish with nary a scene without it. Some terrific, memorable themes that are right in line with those that came before, from Elfman to Gondomfall to Zimmer to Howard to Hulkenberg, exceptional. The film could easily shed 30 minutes. You'd never miss them. You're wrong, in my opinion. You would miss them. As the monotonous detective story simply isn't as clever as it thinks it is. Now, that's an interesting point to look at, isn't it? The monotonous, basically, this is a generation that if you have this kind of slower kind of story, they can't handle it. It's like they've been brought up on speed, and if you take the speed away from them, they can't handle life or entertainment. It's certainly not monotonous to me. When all is revealed, the payoff is more of an of course than an aha, coupled with a bit of are you serious? Reeves created a new Batman that's still kind of like the old. The energy, style and direction are deft, but it forgets to be a Batman story as much as a detective story. But Paul, this is where you've exposed yourself a bit in a lack of knowledge of Batman. A detective story is a Batman story, my friend. In his efforts to finally tell that kind of Batman story, and it has been done, the Batman himself kind of just seems like a guy in a costume with a lot of angst. Well, the Batman is a guy in a costume, and if you saw your parents killed in front of you, you'd have a bit of angst as well. Ultimately, The Batman is a dense, dark and heavy Batman film that is ripe with ambition, stoked with talent, riddled with atmosphere, stifled with perplexity. In other words, he couldn't handle the complex nature of the film. So why not just say, I can't handle dark, long, gritty, complex stories? That's what you're saying, Paul. And filled with the promise of something unique, but not to the point that it changes the game. Does everything have to change the game? I think it somewhat does, but it doesn't have to do that. It can just be a film that you enjoy, right? Repeat viewings will be needed to unpack it all, but over time there will be a lot of fast forwarding and chapter skipping when this is on disc and streaming. Well, maybe by you, my friend, but the people that I talk to, the most important people, more important people than you, are the fans who are so excited to see this film, and fans who have already seen it. One fan who's already tweeted me, so happy, so excited. They're more important than you, Paul. I like you, Paul. You're an okay journalist. You're a passionate fan. I know that you love film, and you come from an era of film where this kind of variety was there, and you're kind of trashing this kind of storytelling. That's interesting to me. What it says to me about the modern day critic and the modern day movie audience, the general audiences, is that throw to them anything dark, anything long, anything complicated, and they call it over convoluted, because they can't handle that kind of complex storytelling. Soups, someone who's become very popular, you know, a young Latino boy, done very well, and I'm very, very proud of him, but he was saying the same stuff. And that's because he's an MCU shill. There's nothing wrong with that, but he's used to films that don't do very much, that don't say very much. WB and DC make heart, and Disney and the MCU make money, and that's the difference. But these people have no nuance and no equality when they're talking about the MCU and DC live action. They'll be more analytical about DC and more critical about DC because they know they'll get away with it, because they know the studio won't punish them and won't stop giving them access. When it comes to Disney, they know they have to shit it. And this is the sadness for me, that the general audience and a lot of critics, not all of them, but a lot of critics, don't have the nuance or the movie palette to enjoy some depth, some complexities. And that's a very sad thing and a very sad state of affairs for modern day movie making. That's why we're riddled with films that you'll watch once and you'll never see again. This has been Movies TV Mad. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this perfection. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Oh, no, you won't see me again tomorrow. You'll see me later on. We will be going live tonight. Don't miss a kick here on Movies TV Mad.